afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just to say a few words to set the scene. Enoch Arden is an epic narrative poem by Tennyson. It tells the story of a man called Enoch Arden. He's in a sort of a love triangle relationship with Annie, who he marries, but there's also a jealous lover, but also a friend, Philip. They're childhood friends. But Enoch goes to sea in order to help his impoverished family, if you like. And when he comes back 7 years later, he discovers something has happened in his absence regarding marriage, etc. So, rather intriguing.
Long lines of cliff breaking have left a chasm, and in the chasm are foam and yellow sands. Beyond, red roofs about a narrow wharf in cluster, then a mouldered church, and higher, a long street climbs to one tall-towered mill, and high in heaven behind it, a grey down with Danish barrows, and a hazelwood by autumn nutters haunted, flourishes green in a cup-like hollow of the down. Here, on this beach 100 years ago, 3 children of 3 houses, Annie Lee, the prettiest little damsel in the port, and Philip Ray, the miller's only son, and Enoch Arden, a rough sailor's lad, made orphan by a winter shipwreck. Played among the wastes and lumber of the shore. A narrow cave ran in beneath the cliff. In this the children played at keeping house. Enoch was host one day, Philip the next, while Annie still was mistress. But at times Enoch would hold possession for a week. This is my house, and this my little wife. Mine too, said Philip, turn and turn about. When, if they quarrelled, Enoch, stronger made, was master. Then would Philip, his blue eyes all flooded with the helpless wrath of tears, shriek out, I hate you, Enoch. And at this, the little wife would weep for company and pray them not to quarrel for her sake, and say she would be little wife to both. But when the dawn of rosy childhood passed, and the new warmth of life's ascending sun was felt by either, either fixed his heart on that one girl. And Enoch spoke his love. But Philip loved in silence, and the girl seemed kinder unto Philip than to him. But she loved Enoch, though she knew it not, and would asked deny it. Enoch set a purpose evermore before his eyes, to hoard all savings to the uttermost, to purchase his own boat and make a home for Annie, and so prospered that at last a luckier or a bolder fisherman, a carefuller in peril, did not breathe for leagues along that breaker-beaten coast than Enoch. And ere he touched his 21st May, he purchased his own boat and made a home for Annie, nest and nest-like, halfway up the narrow street that clambered toward the mill. On a golden autumn eventide, the younger people making holiday with bag and sack and basket, great and small went nutting to the hazels. Philip stayed, his father lying sick and needing him, an hour behind. But as he climbed the hill, just where the prone edge of the wood began to feather toward the hollow, saw the pair. Enoch and Annie, sitting hand in hand. His large grey eyes and weather-beaten face, all kindled by a still and sacred fire that burned as on an altar. Philip looked, and in their eyes and faces read his doom. Then, as their faces drew together, groaned and slipped aside, and like a wounded life, crept down into the hollows of the wood. There, while the rest loud and merrymaking, he had his dark hour unseen. Bearing a lifelong hunger in his heart. So these were wed, and merrily rang the bells, and merrily ran the years, 7 happy years. 7 happy years of health and competence and mutual love and honorable toil, with children, first a daughter. In him woke, with his first babe's first cry, the noble wish to save all earnings to the uttermost and give his child a better bringing up than his had been, or hers. A wish renewed when 2 years after came a boy to be the rosy idol of their solitudes, while Enoch was abroad on wrathful seas or often journeying landward. Then came a change, as all things human change. 10 miles to northward of the narrow port opened a larger haven. Thither used Enoch at times to go by land or sea, and once when there, clambering on a mast in harbour, by mischance he slipped and fell. A limb was broken when they lifted him, and while he lay recovering there, his wife bore him another son, a sickly one. Another hand crept too across the trade, taking her bread and theirs, And on him fell, although a grave and staid God-fearing man, yet lying thus inactive, doubt and gloom. He seemed as in a nightmare of the night to see his children leading evermore low, miserable lives of hand to mouth, and her he loved, a beggar. Then he prayed, "Save them from this, whatever comes to me." And while he prayed, the master of that ship Enoch had served him, hearing his mischance, came, for he knew the man and valued him, reporting of his vessel China-bound and wanting yet a bosun. Would he go? There yet were many weeks before she sailed from this port. Would Enoch have the place? And Enoch all at once assented to it, rejoicing at that answer to his prayer. So now that the shadow of mischance appeared no graver than as when some little cloud cuts off the fiery highway of the sun and aisles a light in the offing, yet the wife, when he was gone, the children, what to do? Then Enoch lay long pondering on his plans. To sell the boat, and yet he loved her well. How many a rough sea had he weathered in her? He knew her as a horseman knows his horse, and yet to sell her. Then with what she brought, buy goods and stores, set Annie forth in trade with all that seamen needed, all their wives, so she might keep the house while he was gone. Thus Enoch in his heart determined all. Then moving homeward came on Annie, pale, nursing the sickly babe, her latest born. Forward she started with a happy cry and laid the feeble infant in his arms, whom Enoch took and handled all his limbs, appraised his weight, and fondled father-like, but had no heart to break his purposes to Annie till the morrow, when he spoke. Then first, since Enoch's golden ring had girt her finger, Annie fought against his will, yet not with brawling opposition she, but manifold entreaties, many a tear, many a sad kiss, by day and night renewed, sure that all evil would come out of it, besought him, supplicating, if he cared for her or his dear children, not to go. He, not for his own self caring, but her and her children, let her plead in vain, so grieving held his will and bore it through. And Enoch faced the morning of farewell brightly and boldly. All his Annie's fears, save as his Annie's, were a laughter to him. Yet Enoch, as a brave God-fearing man, bowed himself down, and in that mystery where God in man is one with man and God, prayed for a blessing on his wife and babes, whatever came to him. And then he said, "Annie, this voyage, by the grace of God, will bring fair weather yet to all of us." But when he turned the current of his talk to graver things, in sailor fashion, roughly sermonizing on providence and trust in heaven, she heard and not heard him, as the village girl who sets her pitcher underneath the spring, musing on him that used to fill it for her, hears and not hears, and lets it overflow. At length she spoke. "O Enoch, you are wise, and yet for all your wisdom, well I know that I shall look upon your face no more." "Well then," said Enoch, "I shall look on yours. Annie, the ship I sail in passes here." He named the day. "Get you a seaman's glass, spy out my face, and laugh at all your fears." But when the last of those moments came, "Annie, my girl, cheer up, be comforted, look to the babes. Until I come again, keep everything shipshape, for I must go. And fear no more for me, or if you fear, cast all your cares on God. That anchor holds. Is he not yonder in those uttermost parts of the morning? If I flee to these, can I go from him? And the sea is his. The sea is his. He made it. Enoch rose, cast his strong arms about his drooping wife, and kissed his wonder-stricken little ones. But for the third, sickly one, who slept after a night of feverish wakefulness, when Annie would have raised him, Enoch said, "Wake him not. Let him sleep. How should this child remember this?" and kissed him in his cot. But Annie, from her baby's forehead, clipped a tiny curl and gave it. This he kept through all his future. But now, hastily caught his bundle, waved his hand, and went his way. When the day that Enoch mentioned came, borrowed a glass, but all in vain. Perhaps she could not fix the glass to suit her eye. Perhaps her eye was dim, hand tremulous. She saw him not. And while he stood on deck waving, the moment and the vessel passed. Even to that last dip of the vanishing sail, she watched it. And departed, weeping for him. Then, though she mourned his absence as his grave, set her sad will no less to chime with his, but throve not in her trade, not being bred to barter, nor compensating the want by shrewdness, neither capable of lies, nor asking over much and taking less, and still foreboding, what would Enoch say? Now the third child was sickly born and grew yet sicklier, though the mother cared for it with all a mother's care. Nevertheless, whether her business often called her from it, or through the want of what it needed most, or means to pay the voice who best could tell what most it needed, howsoe'er it was, after a lingering, ere she was aware, like the caged bird escaping suddenly, the little innocent soul flitted away. In that same week, when Annie buried it, Philip's true heart, which hungered for her peace, since Enoch left he had not looked upon her, smote him, as having kept aloof so long. "Surely," said Philip, "I may see her now, may be some little comfort, and therefore went, passed through the solitary room in front, paused for a moment at an inner door, then struck it thrice, and, no one opening, entered. But Annie, seated with her grief fresh from the burial of her little one, cared not to look on any human face, but turned her own toward the wall and wept. Then Philip, standing up, said falteringly, "Annie, I came to ask a favor of you. I came to speak to you of what he wished, Enoch, your husband. I do beseech you, by the love you bear him and his children, not to say me nay, for if you will, when Enoch comes again, why then he shall repay me. If you will, Annie, for I am rich and well-to-do. Now let me put the boy and girl to school. This is the favor that I came to ask." Then Annie, with her brows against the wall, answered, "I cannot look you in the face. I seem so foolish and so broken down. When you came in, my sorrow broke me down, and now I think your kindness breaks me down. But Enoch lives, that is borne in on me. He will repay you. Money can be repaid, not kindness such as yours." Then Philip put the boy and girl to school and brought them needful books, and every way, like one who does his duty by his own, made himself theirs. From distant corners of the street they ran to greet his hearty welcome heartily. Lords of his house and of his mill were they, worried his passive ear with petty wrongs or pleasures, hung upon him, played with him, and called him Father Philip. Philip gained as Enoch lost, for Enoch seemed to them uncertain as a vision or a dream, faint as a figure seen in early dawn down at the far end of an avenue, going we know not where. And so, 10 years since Enoch left his hearth and native land, fled forward. And no news of Enoch came. It chanced one evening Annie's children longed to go with others, nutting to the wood, and Annie would go with them. Then they begged for Father Philip, as they called him, too. Him, like the working bee in blossom dust blanched with his mill, they found, and saying to him, "Come with us, Father Philip," he denied. But when the children plucked at him to go, he laughed, and yielding readily to their wish, for was not Annie with them, and they went. But after scaling half the weary down, just when the prone edge of the wood began to feather toward the hollow, all her force failed her, and sighing, "Let me rest," she said. But Philip, sitting at her side, forgot her presence, and remembered one dark hour here in this wood, when, like a wounded life, he crept into the shadow. At last he said, lifting his honest forehead, "Listen, Annie, how merry they are down yonder in the wood. Tired, Annie?" For she did not speak a word. Tired? But her face had fallen upon her hands. Then Philip, coming somewhat closer, spoke. Annie, there is a thing upon my mind, and it has been upon my mind so long that though I know not when it first came there, I know that it will out at last. Oh, Annie, it is beyond all hope, against all chance, that he who left you 10 long years ago should still be living. Well then, let me speak. I grieve to see you poor and wanting help. I cannot help you as I wish to do, unless, they say that women are so quick, perhaps you would know what I would have you know. I wish you for my wife. Then answered Annie, tenderly she spoke. You have been as God's good angel in our house. God bless you for it. God will reward you for it. Philip, God will reward you with something happier than myself. Can one live twice? Can you be ever loved as Enoch was? What is it that you ask? I am content, he answered, to be loved a little after Enoch. Oh, she cried, scared as it were. Dear Philip, wait a while. If Enoch comes, but Enoch will not come. Yet wait a year. A year is not so long. Surely I shall be wiser in a year. Oh, wait a little. Philip sadly said, Annie, as I have waited all my life, I well may wait a little. Nay, she cried, I am bound. You have my promise. In a year. Will you not bide your year as I bide mine? And Philip answered, I will bide my year. And in one moment, as it were, that autumn into autumn flashed again, and there he stood once more before her face, claiming her promise. Is it a year? She asked. Yes, if the nuts, he said, be ripe again. Come out and see. But she put him off. So much to look to, such a change, a month. No, give her a month. She knew that she was bound. A month, no more. Then Philip, with his eyes full of that lifelong hunger and his voice shaking a little like a drunkard's hand, take your own time, Annie. Take your own time. By this, the lazy gossips of the port, abhorrent of a calculation crossed, began to chafe as at a personal wrong. Some thought that Philip did but trifle with her, some that she but held off to draw him on, and others laughed at her, and Philip too, as simple folks that knew not their own minds. And one, in whom all evil fancies clung like serpent eggs together, laughingly would hint a worse in either. Her own son was silent, though he often looked his wish, but evermore the daughter pressed upon her to wed the man so dear to all of them, and lift the household out of poverty. And Philip's rosy face contracting grew careworn and wan, and all those things fell on her sharp as reproach. At last, one night it chanced that Annie could not sleep, but earnestly prayed for a sign. My Enoch, is he gone? Then compassed round by the blind wall of night, brooked not the expectant terror of her heart, started from bed and struck herself a light, then desperately seized the holy book, suddenly set it wide to find a sign, suddenly put her finger on the text, under a palm tree. That was nothing to her, no meaning there. She closed the book and slept. When lo, her Enoch, sitting on a height, under a palm tree, over him the sun. He is gone, she thought. He is happy. He is singing Hosanna in the highest. Yonder shines the sun of righteousness. And these be palms, whereof the happy people strowing cried, Hosanna in the highest. Here she woke, resolved, sent for him, and said wildly to him, there is no reason why we should not wed. Then for God's sake, he answered, both our sakes, so you will wed me, let it be at once. So these were wed, and merrily rang the bells, and they were wed. But merrily, never merrily beat Annie's heart. A footstep seems to fall beside her path, she knew not whence, a whisper on her ear, she knew not what. Nor loved she to be left alone at home, nor ventured out alone. What ailed her then, that ere she entered, often her hand dwelt lingeringly on the latch, fearing to enter? Philip thought he knew. Such doubts and fears were common to her state, being with child. But when her child was born, then her new child was as herself renewed. Then the new mother came about her heart. Then her good Philip was her all in all, and that mysterious instinct wholly died. And where was Enoch? Prosperously sailed the ship Good Fortune, though at setting forth, the Biscay, roughly ridging eastward, shook and almost overwhelmed her. Yet unvexed, she slipped across the summer of the world. Less lucky, her home voyage. At first, indeed, through many a fair sea circle, day by day, scarce rocking, her full-busted figurehead stared o'er the ripple, feathering from her bows. Then followed calms, and then winds, variable, then baffling, a long course of them. At last, storm, such as drove her under moonless heavens, till hard upon the cry of breakers came the crash of ruin and the loss of all but Enoch and two others. Half the night, buoyed upon floating tackle and broken spars, these drifted, stranding on an isle at morn, rich but loneliest in a lonely sea. There, in a seaward-gazing mountain gorge, they built and thatched with leaves of palm a hut, half native cavern. So the three, set in this Eden of all plenteousness, dwelt with eternal summer, ill content. For one, the youngest, hardly more than boy, hurt in that night of sudden ruin and wreck, lay lingering out a 3 years' death in life. They could not leave him. After he was gone, the two remaining found a fallen stem, and Enoch's comrade, careless of himself, fire-hollowing this in Indian fashion, fell sun-stricken, and that other lived alone. In those two deaths, he read God's warning: wait. The mountain, wooded to the peak, the lawns and winding glades, high up like ways to heaven, the slender cocoa's drooping crown of plumes, the lightning flash of insect and of bird, the luster of the long convolvuluses that coiled around the stately stems and ran even to the limit of the land, the glows and glories of the broad belt of the world, all these he saw. But what he fain had seen, he could not see. The kindly human face, nor ever hear a kindly voice, but heard the myriad shriek of wheeling ocean fowl, the league-long roller thundering on the reef, the moving whisper of huge trees that branched and blossomed in the zenith, or the sweep of some precipitous rivulet to the wave, as down the shore he ranged, or all day long sat often in the seaward gazing gorge, a shipwrecked sailor waiting for a sail. No sail from day to day. But every day the sunrise, broken into scarlet shafts among the palms and ferns and precipices, the blaze upon the waters to the east, the blaze upon his island overhead, the blaze upon the waters to the west, then the great stars that globe themselves in heaven, the hollowly bellowing ocean, and again the scarlet shafts of sunrise. But no sail. There often, as he watched, or seemed to watch, so still the golden lizard on him paused. A phantom made of many phantoms moved before him, haunting him, or he himself moved, haunting people, things and places, known far in a darker isle beyond the line. The babes, their babble, Annie, the small house, the climbing street, the mill, the leafy lanes, the peacock yew tree, the horse he drove, the boat he sold, the chill November dawns and dewy blooming downs, the gentle shower, the smell of dying leaves and the low moan of leaden-colored seas. Once, likewise, in the ringing of his ears, though faintly, merrily, far and far away, he heard the pealing of his parish bells. Then, though he knew not wherefore, started up, shuddering, and when the beauteous, hateful isle returned upon him, had not his poor heart spoken with that which, being everywhere, lets none who speaks with him seem all alone. Surely the man had died of solitude. thus, over Enoch's early silvering head, the sunny and rainy seasons came and went, year after year. His hopes to see his own and pace the sacred old familiar fields not yet had perished, when his lonely doom came suddenly to an end. Another ship, she wanted water, blown by baffling winds like the good fortune from her destined course, stayed by this isle. They sent a crew that, landing, burst away in search of stream or fount and filled the shores with clamor. Downward from his mountain gorge stepped the long-haired, long-bearded solitary, brown, looking hardly human, strangely clad, muttering and mumbling, idiot-like it seemed, with inarticulate rage and making signs they knew not what. And yet he led the way to where the rivulets of sweet water ran. And ever as he mingled with the crew and heard them talking, his long-bounden tongue was loosened till he made them understand, whom, when their casks were filled, they took aboard. And dull the voyage was with long delays, the vessel scarce seaworthy, but evermore his fancy fled before the lazy wind returning, till beneath a clouded moon he, like a lover, down through all his blood, drew in the dewy, meadowy morning breath of England, blown across her ghostly wall. And that same morning officers and men levied a kindly tax upon themselves, pitying the lonely man, and gave him it. Then moving up the coast, they landed him, even in that harbour whence he sailed before. There Enoch spoke no word to anyone, but homeward, home, what home? Had he a home, his home? He walked. Bright was that afternoon, sunny but chill, till drawn through either chasm, where either haven opened on the deeps, rolled a sea haze and whelmed the world in grey. Thicker the drizzle grew, deeper the gloom. Last, as it seemed, a great mist-blotted light flared on him, and he came upon the place. But finding neither light nor murmur there, a bill of sail gleamed through the drizzle, crept still downward, thinking, dead, or dead to me. Down to the pool and narrow wharf he went, seeking a tavern which of old he knew. He thought it must have gone, but he was gone who kept it, and his widow, Miriam Lane, with daily dwindling profits, held the house. There Enoch rested silently many days. But Miriam Lane was good and garrulous, nor let him be, but often breaking in, told him, with other annals of the port, not knowing Enoch was so brown, so bowed, so broken, all the story of his house, his baby's death, her growing poverty, how Philip put her little ones to school and kept them in it, his long wooing her, her slow consent and marriage, and the birth of Philip's child. And o'er his countenance no shadow passed, nor motion. Anyone regarding well had deemed he felt the tale less than the teller. Only when she closed, Enoch, poor man, was cast away and lost. He, shaking his head pathetically, repeated, muttering, cast away and lost. Again, in deeper inward whispers, lost. But Enoch yearned to see her face again. If I might look on her sweet face again and know that she is happy. So the thought haunted and harassed him and drove him forth. At evening, when the dull November day was growing duller with twilight, drove him to the hill. For Philip's dwelling fronted on the street, the latest house to landward. But behind, with one small gate that opened on the waste, flourished a little garden square and walled. And in it throve an ancient evergreen, a yew tree, and all around it ran a walk of shingle, and a walk divided it, But Enoch shunned the middle walk and stole up behind the wall, behind the yew, and thence that which he better might have shunned if griefs like his have worse or better, Enoch saw. For cups and silver on the burnished board sparkled and shone, so genial was the hearth. And on the right hand of the hearth he saw Philip, the slighted suitor of old times, stout, rosy, with his babe across his knees. And o'er her second father stooped a girl, a later but a loftier Annie Lee, fair-haired and tall. And from her lifted hand dangled a length of ribbon and a ring to tempt the babe, who reared his creasy arms, caught at and ever missed it, and they laughed. And on the left hand of the hearth he saw the mother glancing often toward her babe, but turning now and then to speak with him. Her son, who stood beside her, tall and strong, and saying that which pleased him, for he smiled. Now when the dead man, come to life, beheld his wife no more, and saw the babe, hers yet not his, upon the father's knee, and all the warmth, the peace, the happiness, and his own children tall and beautiful, and him, that other, reigning in his place, lord of his rights and of his children's love. Then he, though Miriam Lane had told him all, because things seen are mightier than things heard, staggered and shook, holding the branch, and feared to send abroad a shrill and terrible cry, which in one moment, like the blast of doom, would shatter all the happiness of the hearth. He therefore turning softly like a thief, lest the harsh shingle should grate underfoot, and feeling all along the garden wall, lest he should swoon and tumble and be found, crept to the gate, and opened it and closed as lightly as a sick man's chamber door behind him, and came out upon the waste. There he would have knelt, but that his knees were feeble, so that falling prone he dug his fingers into the wet earth and prayed. Too hard to bear. Why did they take me thence, O God Almighty? Blessed Savior, thou that didst uphold me on my lonely isle, uphold me, Father, in my loneliness a little longer. Aid me. Give me strength not to tell her. Never to let her know. Help me not to break in upon her peace. My children too, must I not speak to these? They know me not. I should betray myself. Never. No father's kiss for me, the girl so like her mother. And the boy, my son. There, speech and thought and nature failed a little, and he lay tranced. But when he rose and paced back toward his solitary home again, all down the long and narrow street he went beating it in upon his weary brain, as though it were the burthen of a song, not to tell her, never to let her know, not to tell her, never to let her know. Never. This miller's wife, he said to Miriam, that you told me of, has she no fear that her first husband lives? Aye, aye, poor soul, said Miriam, fear enow. If you could tell her you had seen him dead, why, that would be her comfort. And he thought, after the Lord has called me, she shall know. I wait his time. And Enoch set himself, scorning an alms, to work whereby to live. Yet since he did but labor for himself, work without hope, there was not life in it whereby the man could live. And as the year rolled itself round again to meet the day when Enoch had returned, a languor came upon him, gentle sickness, gradually weakening the man till he could do no more but kept the house, his chair, and last, his bed. He called aloud for Miriam Lane and said, Woman, I have a secret. Only swear before I tell you. Swear upon the book not to reveal it till you see me dead. Dead, clamored the good woman. Hear him talk. I warn, man, that we shall bring you round. Swear, added Enoch sternly, on the book. And on the book, half frighted, Miriam swore. Then Enoch, rolling his grey eyes upon her, Did you know Enoch Arden of this town? Know him, she said. I knew him far away. Aye, I mind him coming down the street, held his head high and cared for no man, he. Slowly and sadly Enoch answered her, His head is low, and no man cares for him. I think I have not 3 more days to live. I am the man. At which the woman gave a half-incredulous, half-hysterical cry. You, Arden, you! Nay, sure he was a foot higher than you be. Enoch said again, My God has bowed me down to what I am. My grief and solitude have broken me. Nevertheless, know you that I am he who married, but that name has twice been changed. I married her who married Philip Ray. Sit, listen. Then he told her of his voyage, his wreck, his lonely life, his coming back, his gazing in on Annie, his resolve, and how he kept it. As the woman heard, fast flowed the current of her easy tears, while in her heart she learned incessantly to rush abroad all round the little haven, proclaiming Enoch Arden and his woes. But awed and promise-bounden, she forbore, saying only, See your bairns before you go. Hey, let me fetch 'em, Arden. And arose, eager to bring them down, for Enoch hung a moment on her words, but then replied, Woman, disturb me not, now at the last, but let me hold my purpose till I die. Sit down again, mark me and understand while I have power to speak. I charge you now, when you shall see her, tell her that I died blessing her, praying for her, loving her, save for the bar between me and her, loving her, as when she laid her head beside my own. And tell my daughter, Annie, whom I saw so like her mother, that my latest breath was spent in blessing her and praying for her. And tell my son that I died blessing him, and say to Philip that I blessed him too. He never meant us anything but good. But if my children care to see me dead, who hardly saw me living, let them come. I am their father. But she must not come, for my dead face would vex her afterlife. And now there is but one of all my blood who will embrace me in the world to be. This hair is his. She cut it off and gave it, and I have borne it with me all these years, and thought to bear it with me to my grave. But now my mind is changed, for I shall see him, my babe in bliss. Wherefore, when I am gone, give her this, for it may comfort her. It will, moreover, be a token to her that I am he. He ceased, and Miriam Lane made such a voluble answer, promising all, that once again he rolled his eyes upon her, repeating all he wished. And once again she promised. Then the third night after this, while Enoch slumbered motionless and pale, and Miriam watched and dozed at intervals, there came so loud a calling of the sea that all the houses in the haven rang. He woke, he rose, he spread his arms abroad, crying with a loud voice, "A sail, a sail! I am saved!" And so fell back and spoke no more. So passed the strong, heroic soul away. And when they buried him, the little port had seldom seen a costlier funeral.